It's white to play in this position. Please judge whether rook takes b6 is a good move or a blunder. I published my course Preventing Blunders in Chess almost 2 months ago, and I'm extremely humbled and happy about the feedback it received in the meantime. It got almost 100 stars already from 100 different people, and the reviews are astonishingly motivating. I won't brag about it, guys, although I really want to let the world know about this because that really makes me happy as an author. Because I'm feeling that I'm helping people, I'm touching people's lives, I'm giving them a method to reduce the number of blunders. We are humans, it's inevitable that we'll commit blunders at some point, but if we can reduce their number, if we can raise your floor, then you will start appreciating the true beauty of chess. Real strategic depth of chess can be understood and enjoyed practically if and only if your floor is high, if and only if you don't blunder needlessly in your games. This was one of the overarching goals of this course, and in this video I will show you the clam checklist, how it operates to spot and reduce the blunders. Folks, it's equal material and the pawn on b3 is hanging right now, so of course we would like to grab on b6 while also guarding the pawn on b3, but what's the right question you must ask yourself to check for blunders? Is my move giving a winning tactic for the opponent? As a result of my next move, what is changing? Am I creating a devastating check for the opponent, or am I creating a loose square, particularly on the board, that my opponent can exploit, right? Blunders involve your very move changes the position that allows a winning tactic for the opponent. Of course, we start with letter C, which stands for checks usually, because checkmate ends the game. In this position, bishop d3 is their only meaningful check against your king, but the rook was covering that square. That square is hit once by the bishop and defended once by the rook on d6. Then if you go ahead and grab the pawn on b6, you must be mindful that you're allowing this check to black, okay? It must be your task to check whether this check is devastating for you or not. This also involves, of course, basic tactical vision. For example, the king is already cut off on the e-file because of the rook, so the king has to go to g1 against bishop d3 check. And then, of course, back rank mate motifs emerge. Those patterns should be ingrained in your long-term memories at some point. Rook e1 check is allowed, bishop f1, followed up with take on f1, and black is completely winning that position. Please visualize it, guys. Rook takes b6, that's a blunder because you're inviting bishop b3 check. Your very move is allowing this check, which wasn't there before, right? Right now, there is no direct threat of bishop b3 because your rook will just take it. But your very move is changing the position and allowing a devastating check for the opponent. That's why chess is the cruelest game ever, probably, because a single slip at any moment in the game, you can lose any chess position. So your floor must be very high to spot these things. Also, look at this. That involves a pawn capture. We will be drilling this over and over again in this video. People also see those pawns, looks like a marshmallow pawn, looks so irresistible. Let me go and grab it. In those moments, people become even more impulsive, right? It looks like a beautiful move. You don't want to lose the pawn on b3. You want to grab a pawn on b6. It looks beautiful strategically, but a grandiose and beautiful strategic ideas can turn out to be devastating blunders in chess. You must always test your beautiful ideas with this final blunder check method. Now we start with letter C, of course. Letter C stands for checks. If I make this move, am I allowing a check to the opponent? And that's the only check, really. I mean, look at this, right? That was the only check option at all for black as a result of your next move. Because rook e1 check is nothing. Your king will just take it. So this is the only check. You must be mindful before you take on b6. Turns out to be a devastating one indeed, because knight e2, rook takes e2, lost the piece for nothing, game is over, and king g1, one more check is following, guys, rook e1 check, and you see, this is just game over basically. They can even take the check, extra piece for black, not to mention those ideas, and so on and so on. This game is totally finished. So the best move for white was a beautiful multifunctional bishop b7, not only hitting the pawn on a6, but also, importantly, vacating the g2 square for the king. You see it, right? The king no longer gets mated on e1. You're giving more room to your king as well in this position. If they take on b3, you're happy with bishop takes a6. You also guard your pawn on c4. You attack the pawn as well. And this game is totally fine for white. And if they go ahead and play a5, now you tell me, guys, can we take on b6? Is it now a safe move or a blunder? Please go through the same process again. That's a rewarding exercise for you, right? You want to take the pawn on b6 to also guard your pawn on b3. But what's the question? Am I allowing a devastating check if I make this move? Please visualize bishop b3 check and tell me your next move. Yes, now things are different. Your king will escape to g2 and nobody can check the king on its new square. The rook is harmless, the knight is harmless, and you win a pawn for nothing in this position. This must be checked by white. King g2 is beautiful, right? Everything is protected. The bishop is covering this long diagonal. This rook cannot give a check. The knight cannot give a check. The bishop cannot give a check. This means you won an important pawn on b6 and you're simply better in this position. This already connects to letter M in our checklist, by the way, guys, namely mobility restrictions. Your king is restrained in mobility in this position. Cannot go here, cannot go there, can only go to g1, right? Whenever your king has no legal squares or only one legal square like this, then you must be also mindful about all kind of potential checks to your king. So we drilled two important concepts in this exercise, namely see and lose squares in chess. A piece can be loose or a square can be loose as well in chess. You see, this square on d3 is attacked once, guarded only once by the rook. Loose square has equal number of attackers and defenders. So you must be mindful that your very move is basically turning this loose square into a hanging square. And yes, we can talk about hanging squares in chess. You're hanging the d3 square if you make the move rook takes b6. Carlsen versus Anand 2014, white to play, guys. Another pawn grabbing question to you. Should white grab the pawn on e6 in this position? Knight takes e6. Please check the safety status of this move. Are you allowing a winning tactic to black if you make that move? Folks, can you see? If you take on e6, the knight becomes loose. If you have 0 attackers and 0 defenders on that square, plus you're creating a horizontal alignment between your pieces on the 6th rank. That stands for A in our clamp checklist, namely alignments. Alignments are very important tactical tools in chess. Usually discover checks, pins and skewers stem from certain alignments between different pieces. So it's your task before you take pawn like that to see this alignment and to see that black can make the move rook b6 against knight takes e6. You see? Simply attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves, you're losing the knight on e6. Both pieces indeed are loose in that position. Carlsen played the move, and I remember he was devastated. There's even a video on YouTube you can check. He was just shocked. Of course, he had not so much time on his clock left. He played the move, and then Anand played rook b6, of course, and he was just so angry with himself. With best play, white might save this position, but it becomes a very difficult task in time pressure as well. So, what is the lesson here? Your bishop was loose to begin with. 0 attackers, 0 defenders, which means vigilance is required. And as a result of this pawn capture on e6, you're creating one more loose piece, plus you're creating alignment between 2 loose pieces, right? Seeds of tactical destruction has been planted using Dan Heisman's terminologies. So, it's a blunder because you allow rook b6. What we learn here is we combine letter L and A in our clamp checklist. Loose pieces plus alignments, they're always relevant in chess. Also, once you know this by heart, once you use the clamp checklist to prevent blunders, you can also apply it to find winning tactics for yourself. One of my biggest hopes with this course, that this skill should transfer to finding good ideas for yourself as well. Whenever your opponent makes a move, ask yourself, are they creating a loose piece? Are they creating an alignment? And the answer seems to be yes in this case. Then it becomes easy to find those resources to punish their blunders. One more position, folks. Knight versus bishop. Black played the move e3 in this position. Interesting, right? It looks like a pawn sacrifice. Please tell me whether white should grab like this, or should we even not grab the pawn and play something else, okay? Your task is to find the best response against the move e3. This connects to knight fork alignment in my course. I also categorize knight forks in the subchapter of under alignments, because to my mind, knight forks exploit particular alignments on the board. And of course, I have a deep dive in the actual course to talk about all kinds of knight blunders, knight forks, and how to quickly spot them and prevent them. I'll giving you some important tools like cheat sheets to quickly spot whether your opponent knight can cause devastation in your camp. This position is interesting because it also involves a pawn structure change potentially. Okay, let's start with this. E4, E4, E3 definitely highlights this idea, right? They are vacating the E4 square for their knight. So we must be very mindful about their check on the next turn. Right now, the bishop on G3 is protected. It's attacked 0 times, guarded once by the pawn. You're playing with the protected bishop on G3. But if you take with this guy on E3, first of all, are you even seeing that your bishop will become a loose piece? You will have 0 attackers and 0 defenders on G3. And now, knight E4 check becomes devastating, right? You're allowing this fork and you're losing the bishop on the next turn. Another pawn structure transformation, another blunder involving a pawn move, and the pawn's function was to guard the bishop. No longer, knight E4, you lose the bishop, black wins. If you take with this guy, which is the correct move, your bishop remains protected. Knight E4 check. Yes, they can play knight E4 check with this double attack, but king D4 defends the pawn as well. If they take the bishop, white is very happy because white has the extra pawn in a pawn endgame with a completely winning position. Again, this involved a combination of L and A. Knight fork alignment must be seen by white, but even L, because your pawn move was turning this bishop into a loose piece, thus the letter L. Pawn structure changes can be easily missed by beginners, post-beginners, intermediate players. That's my experience as a coach across the years, right? When people are visualizing their pawn moves, pawn structure changes, sometimes pawn captures, as we've seen in this video, people tend to forget about the clamp checklist, or people tend to misvisualize the resulting position. Yeah, the bishop was very protected for the entire time, right? No concern whatsoever about the bishop's safety status. But the moment you take on E3 with the pawn, things are changing. It was your task to ask yourself, right? As a result of my next move, am I unprotecting something? And that's a very beautiful auxiliary question that can help you to spot the blunders. Because most often, right, every single move has a drawback in chess. By making certain move, you're unprotecting something else on the chessboard. Ask yourself, as a result of my next move, am I unprotecting something? What has become unprotected if I make this move, right? That's a great question. Same, if you take with this D2 pawn, you're unprotecting the pawn on C3, correct? You must also see this, of course. This pawn was protecting here. If I take here, then this is lacking support. I'm creating a loose pawn on C3. And of course, knight E4 check should be seen, but after king D4, I defend my loose pawn on C3 with my king. And importantly, my bishop also remains protected. Everybody is protecting each other and so on. Also see, knight forks arise when the enemy knight is on the same square as our pieces. Look at this. The knight is on a black square. The king and the bishop are also on a dark square. And here, you definitely need to be more vigilant about potential knight forks, right? Very quick way to spot whether a knight fork exists in the position is you look at the color of the enemy knight and your pieces that could be forked by the enemy knight. It's black to play in this position. Please judge whether c takes b2 is a good move or a blunder. The good thing about this course, guys, is that it involves puzzles that allow you to make moves that seem to be blunders at first sight, but by looking 1 or 2 plies deeper, you understand that they're in fact very good moves. So we are fighting against passive mindset. I don't want you to dismiss moves that at first sight seem to be blunders. I want you to, just like in a real game, to calculate a few plies deeper to make sure that they are blunders or safe moves. This also makes the course more challenging, but also more real game-like. That skill is very important as well, right? Not to dismiss moves that at first sight seems to be unsafe in chess. Okay, c takes b2. First of all, another pawn structure transformation, as we saw in today's episode, that's underlying theme. The pawn structure is changing. Are you noticing that the rook on c7 was a loose piece to start with? Have you seen the alignment between those rooks to start with? And even you're allowing the move rook c7 with a check. It looks like a crazy move, don't you think? You're losing the rook with a check. Many people would stop at that point. They would dismiss the move out of hand. They would not even look one ply deeper. I'm inviting you right now, guys, to look one ply deeper. Rook c7 check. Go beyond. Make one more move with black. Make a move that stops all kind of checks, right? Rook c7 check is on the board. Where should the king move to not even deal with any kind of check in the position? Yes, king e6, guys. King e6. The king is very close to the knight. The knight cannot move while giving a check. Rook c6 check. I will just capture your rook in that position. The rook cannot give a check against the king. There are other checks to calculate. And now please see, there's a pawn on b2 for black. Can white stop that pawn? Is white in a position to control the promotion square? Please look at that position, guys. Please visualize it from this position. C takes b2, rook c7 check, king e6. Can you see the function of the bishop on d5? It's stopping the black rook from going to b7 and stopping that pawn, right? The knight cannot move while guarding b1. The king is far away, and you're simply winning that position because white cannot prevent b1 equals queen on the next turn. That was my point with you go beyond the surface features and you still make moves that seems to be blunders at first sight. King e6, please look at this position, guys. Rook c1 doesn't work because of the pawn. Beautiful pattern. Rook b7 is the only way it seems, but the bishop will simply take that rook. The knight cannot move with a check and pick up the pawn either. Otherwise, I am promoting to a queen on the next turn. We are down the rook, but this pawn is devastating on the second rank. So, only strong players calculate those moves. They look beyond surface features. They don't dismiss moves out of hand. They, of course, also know so many patterns in chess that sometimes, pawns on the second rank or seventh rank can easily defeat a rook and so on. And even after here, I would say king e6 is much more technical than king f6 because king f6, you're allowing one more check to deal with. Of course, after king g7, everything is safe. There's no more check to be worried about. Rook b7 doesn't work. You're winning on the next turn. But king e6 is cute because there's no real check to even calculate in this position, right? If you play king d6, guys, that would be a big, big mistake because you're allowing the move knight c4 with a check. That's the problem for us. And either that knight is picking up our important pawn on b2, if you take the rook, right? White is completely fine in his position. And if you take on c4, then they are having the move rook b7. And it's white who is completely winning in this position because the bishop no longer covers this b7 square. And after knight c4 check, what are you doing? I mean, there's nothing else to do, right? You have to go for this line and the game is completely equal. See, letter C, letter L, and letter A were combined in this position to check for blunders, and yet we made the move that seems to be blunder at first sight, right? This move goes against letter C, letter L, letter A we discussed so far, and yet we are seeing also the power of an advanced passed pawn in chess. So expect these kind of three-ply calculation exercises in my course as well. I created a separate course on fundamental chess calculation skills that involve such short calculations, right? Three-ply calculations, first ply, second ply, third ply, and you can basically stop here and conclude and evaluate properly. If you calculate accurately, shortly, like three-ply lines like this, then your chess floor will elevate, your calculation skills will improve, and you will become an overall much stronger chess player. One more position touching the letter M in our checklist, namely mobility restrictions. If you make that move, are you trapping one of your own pieces? Is one of your own pieces getting trapped and lacking mobility if you make that move? Here, knight d4 was chosen in the actual game because the white player wanted to hit the pawn on e6, hit the pawn on b5, and so on and so on. So they made the move knight d4. What is the downside, if I ask you, of the move knight d4? Can you see a clear drawback of the move knight d4? That's my first question to you. I want you to observe it yourself. There is one clear problem tactically behind the move knight d4. Yes, and it's not the piece that moves that gets trapped, but it's some other piece in the position that gets trapped as a result. And of course, guys, that's rook on e4. Terribly restrained in the center of the board. Well, there's only one legal square for the rook to move into, but if you make the move knight d4 yourself, then this rook, oh boy, he's just stuck in this well, diamond shape in the middle of the board. Very strange location for the rook, by the way. And now there is no more square left for the rook. The question is, can they attack the rook on e4? And the answer is yes, because look, the final downside of your knight e4 move is the bishop can no longer control the c5 square. Of course, they will play knight c5, hitting your rook, and your rook is trapped in the center of the board. Beautiful blunder check, right? Downside of the move knight e4 is the bishop can no longer access c5, and the rook is restrained in mobility completely. Thus, knight e2 was a better option, keeping the options for the rook, attacking the pawn on c4, thus making it more difficult for black to take on a4. If they take on a4, you can take on c4 with both pieces, maybe even the rook in this position. That was the basic point of knight e2, right? Putting pressure on the pawn on c4 and maybe even highlighting those ideas. With best play, white might survive. Of course, black is better in this position. Maybe even rook d4. If you came up with rook d4, that was also a safe move. I mean, the rook gains more scope, right? The rook is happy in the process because the rook was not doing anything on e4. And that's also what we are testing in those puzzles. Can you observe your pieces as terrible, either positionally or tactically like this, right? We need to give them more room. We need to make sure that they don't get trapped as a result. So this stands for a separate tactical theme called M in our checklist, right? It's different than letter L and A. You can't deduce this M part by using letter L or A. These are distinct tactical themes in chess. That's why I'm presenting them to you as a separate chapter. And finally, letter P, which stands for passed pawns. Why play the move g5, folks? Black to play. Please tell me the only move for black that keeps black alive in this position. There's only one solution that works for black here. Well, pawn endgames are very sharp. Everything must be calculated. And letter P stands for a passed pawn, which is, of course, much more important in endgames in general. The question is this: as a result of my next move, am I allowing an unstoppable passed pawn to my opponent? That's the critical question. Because as Nimzowitsch says, passed pawns are criminals that should be kept under lock and key at all times. I'm also teaching you important positional patterns, passed pawn patterns in this course, namely breakthrough patterns, guys. If you take the pawn on g5, can you tell me the downside of that move? H takes g5 is a clear drawback. That's a blunder, but I want you to spot why that's a blunder. That's a very typical breakthrough pattern. You're inviting the move f6, folks. Your king is far away and this pawn is undermined. You must take that pawn, but then comes h5. And we are learning the rule of the square of the passed pawn. Your king cannot enter this square of the passed pawn on h5. Thus, you cannot stop that pawn. That pawn will promote much earlier than your guys on the king side, and you're losing as a result. Once again, g5 is actually setting up for this devastating idea of f6 and the breakthrough of the pawn. Your king cannot enter inside the square. If in your next move you could enter any square in the square, you could enter the square, then you could be stopping that pawn. But unfortunately, after king d7, right, we can draw the square again, guys. Your king cannot enter the square of the pawn, and thus you're losing. So g5 is a very devastating move because, I mean, if you don't react in this position, white will play f6, and after this, they will promote the pawn anyhow. So your king needs to come back into the game and fight against those pawns single-handedly. King d7 is the only move that keeps black in the game. Why not king d5, you might ask yourself. King d5 fails because of the move g6, guys, because can you see? The king cannot help the king side pawns anymore. The king is stuck, and on the next turn, white will play f6, takes g7, and they're promoting the pawn on g6. That's the problem. If you push the pawn, let's say, to c5 or b5, doesn't matter. They're playing the move f6, and your king cannot deal with these pawns anymore, yeah? Promotion. If after f6, king e6, nothing matters. Takes, and the king cannot stop the pawn in this position. So only king d7 is correct for black. Of course, we don't even finish in this position. White will play the move f6. Again, it's your turn in this position. How do you make sure that you're stopping those pawns on the king side? There are only two solutions, guys. You're a great player if you want to move king e6. The king is getting ready to stop the pawn by themselves. King e8 was also a good move for the same exact idea, guys. Now you tell me, What was wrong with the move g takes f6? If you take on f6 here, then you allow g takes h6, and white is creating an unstoppable pass pawn on h6, and your king cannot enter the square of the pawn. Can you see it, guys? Takes, and the king cannot enter the square of the pawn. And the game is totally over. Well, if you take on g5 in this case, well, they will take on g7. The king cannot stop the pawn. So after f6, what are you doing? It seems like there's nothing else but king e6 or king e8. Let's look at king e6. They will take on g7. King f7, of course. You stop the pawn. Takes. The good thing is this. Your king is stopping all 3 pawns in this position by itself. Thus, you have time to get these 2 guys rolling on the queen side and achieve 2 versus 3 formation. Because of double pawns, they cannot do anything to you on the king side. Meanwhile, their king needs to deal with those guys on the queen side. Thus, it's a complete deadlock. No sides can make progress. The game will end in a draw in this position. Same as king e8, guys. Takes, king f7. Well, we sort of come back to the same position. c5, b5, and so on. And you're creating 2 pass pawns on the queen side, and they're enough to secure a draw for you. Once again, after this course, your vigilance will improve in those pawn endgames. Pawn endgames also contain so many such typical breakthrough patterns, rule of the square patterns, and some surprisingly shocking resources like this, as we've seen, right? It looks shocking. I mean, if I take on g5, it looks like they must recapture. And I'm very happy in this position after king d7, let's say. But suddenly, look at this. As a result of the h6 pawn disappearing from the board, this guy is becoming free to roam as a result of this little move f6, right? Undermining the only pawn that was getting in the way of the h4 pawn. Look at the devastation black is facing in this position. If you've never seen these patterns before, of course, it becomes difficult to calculate all the consequences in this position. Thus, we need those chunks. We need to learn these typical patterns so our vigilance will improve in those positions. And of course, after king d7, there is nothing to worry about this, right? You simply recapture, and this pawn is not dangerous because your king is very close. And you're simply winning this position with those 2 extra pawns on the queen side. And the same goes for g6. In this position, if you don't make a move, white will play f6, takes g7, and they are promoting. Thus, you play king e7, and you're stopping the opponent's idea. The king will become an excellent piece on f6, and your 2 pawns will finish off this task on the queen side. This will be your homework position, folks. Rook e8 was black's last move. The queen is attacked right now. The queen needs to choose a square. Okay? Please write me on YouTube. There's only one solution here. But I want you to find the solution by going through the right steps and asking you the right why questions. Go through the clamp checklist. Identify the potential problems in your camp, right? Ask yourself, letter C, L, A, and so on. And then we are coming up with the correct solution here. There are also a couple of pitfalls. I also want you to maybe write to me why those are bad moves in that position for white. Why they don't work for white at that moment, guys, okay? I'm replying to each and every one of you on YouTube for homework, so please use that chance and interact with me on this platform. Please also check the course. I'm putting a link on this video description. In 2 months, the course received almost 100 reviews, and you can read those reviews. I get humbled and I get so happy in reading them. I really feel like I'm touching people's lives. I'm helping people's chess, and it cannot be a better feedback to receive for a chess coach and a chess teacher like me. I become really happy, guys, to be able to help you. You give me energy and joy as well to work hard on my next courses. Expecting your feedback. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy and if you benefited from this video, and please share the video with a friend of yours that you think might benefit from its content. I know you know many people who also suffer from blunders in chess. So let's raise our chess floor and let's get better in chess so that we can start enjoying deeper aspects of chess in terms of positional chess, strategic aspects, pawn structures, and really true beauty of chess can be understood if and only if your floor is high enough to reduce such quick blunders. Thank you so much, and I will catch you very, very soon.